what if the content that you're not creating is actually the content that would serve you best? I know it probably sounds a little bit counterintuitive. We've been told by the algorithms, by the gurus, the experts, the general noise of online business that more content is the answer, more posts, more platforms, more consistency, more output. And yet, here you are, maybe a little bit tired, a little bit jaded by it all. You may be wondering why you're creating so much content and it still doesn't feel like it is actually working. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. This episode is about creating less content, but with more impact. And I'm not going to give you a hack or a shortcut or turn you into a content creating machine. That is not what I am all about. What I will do is walk you through a different way of thinking about content, one that's going to be more intentional and far more sustainable, a way that I really wish someone would have encouraged me to do from the very beginning of my business journey. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to this week's episode of the Content with Heart podcast. I hope you are well this week. Now, I'm going to jump straight into the episode this week because I want to start by naming something I think that a lot of us feel, but don't always, kind of say it out loud. And that is creating content from a place where you have next to no energy doesn't work. It really doesn't work. You can show up, you can be visible, you can post, you can tick the box. But when you're creating from a place of obligation, or even exhaustion, something is going to feel off, right? And I truly believe that it's not the volume of the content that you create that builds connection with people and takes them through that client journey with you from not knowing anything about you through to becoming that raving paying client of yours. But it comes from a place of quality and your presence within it. One piece of content that genuinely says something that really reflects your thinking, your values, your message, your point of view, just like this podcast episode, will always do more than 5 or even 50 pieces of content created out of a sense of obligation. Always. It will always do more. And this matters way beyond content strategy. This is a capacity conversation. And I know that you know about capacity. Even I feel stretched with hashtag all the things with my casual work, connecting with family and friends and feeding the family and making sure the dog gets walked, all of those things. Because when you're spending your energy on other things in your life and then you have very little creative energy left over for your content, it's not going to serve you or your audience. You're not just wasting time, you're actually spending something that could have gone toward the work that actually matters. The conversations, the offers that you create, the relationships, the things that really do move your business forward. So this isn't about doing less because you're tired, although rest is totally valid and totally real, believe you me. I can't count the number of times that I've said to myself, I'll do something after my shift at work, but I've gone home, walked the dog, made dinner, and felt absolutely done. This is more about doing less because focus is a strategy. Intentionality is a strategy. And simplicity, like that real, considered, make it easy, simple way of doing things, really creates the momentum in a way that volume of content rarely does. So, how can we do this? Well, last week I spoke about the power of reimagination, and that's definitely a key piece in making your content go further. And I'll touch on that again in a minute. But there's probably 4 main things I would love for you to consider if you're ready to make your content simple, but also strategic. And the first one is this idea of the core piece of content. This is the soul of your content, that one meaty, binge-worthy piece of content that really encapsulates what you're all about. And the premise here is really super simple. Instead of asking yourself, what should I create this week, this fortnight, this month? You ask yourself, what is the one piece of content that actually needs to exist and exist forever? So not the one that you should create, not the one that an algorithm favors, but the one that actually has something to say to a real person and something that genuinely matters to them as well. That's your core piece, that's your soul, just like this podcast episode. So I'm so deeply attached to helping entrepreneurs like you really understand that this life, this business, your content isn't about following a formula or a structure. It's simply about being more you and embracing that. It's about working to your strengths and understanding how you like to work and exist. And that idea is woven through all of my podcast episodes. So think about what could be your core piece of content. It might be a blog, a LinkedIn article, a YouTube video, a Facebook Live. The format is really about you and how you like to create, going back to your strengths. And your core piece of content is the piece of content that you're going to stand behind, even if it happens to get no engagement whatsoever. It really reflects your thinking. It's the piece where you're not performing, you're just being you and honest about something that you understand really well and that you're passionate about as well. And here's where it gets practical. Once you have that core piece, everything else becomes optional off the back end of it. So a line from it can become a social media caption, a question underneath it becomes a story. The core idea gets distilled into a short form post. You're not creating from scratch every single time you want to put a piece of content out into the world. You're returning to that one thread and really letting it kind of like breathe across the different spaces where your content grows. And if you want to know more about reimagination, how you can do that, go back to last week's episode. That's episode 215, which brings me to the second idea of how to do less with more impact. And that's thinking about your content flow. So flow is what happens when you stop treating each piece of content as like this separate task and start seeing your content as this one beautiful, continuous conversation, just expressed in different ways and in different places. So most people approach content by thinking about platforms first. What do I need for Instagram? What goes into my email? What do I record in my next reel? And what that does, it really fragments your thinking and your message before you've even begun. You end up creating like these multiple versions of nothing rather than one version of something real. So when you work from that one core piece, the flow becomes almost natural. You know, the thinking is already done for you. The idea already exists. You're just finding the different ways it can show up for different people in different spaces. So when you combine this with a really high level plan that I love to teach inside of the content effect, this takes into consideration your objectives, your sales focus, your client journey. Once you have all of that, then content becomes so much more easy and so much more strategic as well. So I want to give you an example of how this could look. So say you had a conversation with a client and it sparks an insight for you. Something might have clicked in the way that you explained it and you think, that's it. That's the thing I've been trying to articulate for a while. So that insight then becomes your core piece of content. Maybe it's a short blog for an example. And then a key sentence from that piece becomes your next social media post. The question underneath that insight becomes the story in your next email. And the whole thing really takes this one idea and lets it live fully and freely rather than creating, four half-formed ideas that will never quite land with your audience. So content flow isn't about repurposing in that kind of copy and paste sense. And, if you do that, that's perfectly fine. But it's more like, I guess, like one river with lots of different branches. The source of it stays the same. The water just finds different paths along the way. Now, whilst we're talking about simplicity and intentional simplicity, I want to talk about time because I know that's real for most of us. It goes hand in hand with capacity and energy, which I have very little of myself. I'm going to be the first to put my hand up. The time that content creation takes isn't always in the writing and the recording, is it? It's often in the deciding of what to create, when to post it, whether it's good enough, whether it's even the right platform. And that decision fatigue over and over again is where the hours disappear. I used to waste so much time when I first started my business thinking about what on earth to write about in my blog. Intentional simplicity is really about reducing that friction before it even starts. And the way that you do that is by making certain decisions once so you don't have to make them again. So for example, if you've decided that your core piece of content is always a blog, that's one less decision you will ever have to make again. If you've decided that your social content always flows in a certain way from your blog, that's another decision that never needs to be revisited. And if you've taken the first step in the 4 Ps of content consistency, and that is being prepared and getting all of the ideas out of your head, then that's a huge time saver and reduces the decision fatigue even further. I know this might sound strange, but constraints, when they're used well, are genuinely freeing. They narrow the field so that you can actually move forward rather than standing at the edge of, all of the infinite options and wondering where on earth to begin. So a simple exercise I think that's really worth doing is writing down 2 content decisions that you find yourself making the most often, and then ask yourself, could any of these become a standing rule? Something I decide once and just live by. And you might be surprised how much mental space opens up when you do. Now, the last idea that I want to share with you about doing less with more impact is having calm systems in place. This one feels really important to me because I think it's where a lot of well-intentioned content plans can fall apart. Most systems fail, not because they're poorly designed. They fail because they're designed for an ideal version of yourself, the version that's always energized and inspired and always ahead of schedule. And you know what? That version of you is absolutely lovely. I love that version of you, but reality, she doesn't show up every week, and that's just called life. So a calm system is actually built for who you are, including the weeks that are hard, the weeks that are full, the weeks where life simply takes over and content is really the last thing on your mind, which I know can happen often. And the key to a calm system is having that minimum viable version of your content week or your content month, whatever the cycle is that you choose. The smallest, most sustainable thing that you can do to stay present for your audience when your capacity is low. And for some people, that might be just an email, nothing else. Just the email goes out, and that's a great week. And for others, it might be an additional social media post that says something real. It just doesn't have to be much, but it just needs to be something. And when you know your minimum, a hard week stops feeling like a failure. So instead of like dropping the ball and never picking it up again, you have this kind of safety net of content that you know that you can put out into the world. And that psychological safety, I guess, knowing that you can sustain this even when things aren't going perfectly in your life, is actually what creates long-term consistency. And if you want to know more about minimum viable content and how you can implement it into your business, then you can go back to listen to episode 167 about how MBC saved my sanity and my business. So everything that we've talked about today, the core piece of content, the flow, the simplicity, the system, it's not a formula. I want to remind you of that. It's not a rigid structure that you have to follow step by step. It's a practice. It's an acceptance. And like any practice, it takes time to settle into your own way of doing it and feeling comfortable with that. So make sure you give yourself the grace to find out what works best for you. What I found working with people on this is that the thinking is usually the easy part, right? You're listening to this now and you're going, oh yes, Mel, I could do that. But most people understand these ideas quickly. The hard part is actually the implementation. Actually sitting down in your real business with your real schedule and your real energy levels and building something that really is sustainable. And that's what we do inside of the content effect. It's really where this work happens in a supportive way that's built around how you work, not how someone else thinks you should be working. And inside the content effect, we move through your content intention, build your own simple ecosystem, and create the rhythms that make showing up feel a lot more like ease and a lot less like obligation. So it's not a course that you need to consume and, forget about. It's a practice that you grow into. So if you're interested in what this type of support could look like for you, go and check out the link in the show notes. I'd love to see you on the inside. Now, as always, before I finish today, I want to leave you with a few questions for you to sit with. You don't have to answer them now, but I'd really encourage you to return to them sometime. Maybe sit down with a notebook if you like to journal and think about what your answers could be and how you can really embody the ideas in this episode and move away from the understanding into the actual doing. So, the first question is, what is the one piece of content that I create that I genuinely believe in? And how could that become my anchor? Number two is, if my content could only do one thing for my ideal client this week, what would I want it to be? And the last question is, what's one content decision I could make now and never have to make again? Okay, so I want to bring this back to where we started in the episode. And that is the question that what if the content you're not creating is actually the content that would serve you best? And I think that the answer is simpler than we've been led to believe. The content that really serves you best is the content that's honest, is intentional, and creative from a place that has something left to give. And that doesn't require you to create more, it requires you to be more clear. So doing less content isn't about giving up or being less than or being a failure. It's about being focused. And when your content is focused, when it flows from one real idea built into a system that actually holds you, it stops feeling like something you have to do and starts feeling like something that actually works. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I truly appreciate you. And you know what? If this episode has been useful, I would love for you to share it with someone who might need to hear it. With heart, always.